When we speak about death, we often speak about it in the abstract, as though it is something distant, something that happens to others, not to us. But the reality is far more personal, far more immediate. Every single one of us will experience a moment when the noise of this world fades away completely. The voices we are so accustomed to hearing, our family, our friends, the people whose presence defines our daily lives, will suddenly fall silent. And in that moment, you will be placed into a space that has been described in our tradition in the most vivid and unsettling terms: the grave. Think about it from a psychological perspective. Human beings are wired for connection. We fear isolation more than almost anything else. Even in this dunya, prolonged loneliness begins to affect the mind, the heart, even the body. Now imagine a loneliness that is not for a few hours or days, but a loneliness that marks the beginning of an entirely new existence. You are laid into the earth, the soil closes in around you, and one by one, the footsteps of those who buried you begin to fade. There is a narration that reminds us that the deceased can hear the footsteps of the people as they walk away. Just imagine that moment, not metaphorically but literally. You hear them leaving, and you know with absolute certainty they are not coming back. This is the reality we spend our entire lives avoiding. We distract ourselves with entertainment, with work, with ambitions, with relationships. None of these are inherently wrong, but they become dangerous when they make us forget the inevitable. Because the truth is, no matter how strong your relationships are, no matter how much people love you, no matter how much you have accumulated in this world, none of it will accompany you into that grave. Your wealth will be distributed. Your possessions will change hands. Even your closest loved ones, the ones who would sacrifice anything for you, will place you in the ground and return to their lives. And it is not because they do not care. It is because they cannot go with you. There is a profound philosophical lesson here about the nature of existence itself. We come into this world alone, and we will leave it alone. Everything in between is temporary association. We convince ourselves that our identity is tied to these associations: my family, my career, my status. But in the grave, all of these labels are stripped away. What remains is something much more fundamental: who you truly are in the sight of Allah, and what you have sent forward for this moment. This is why the ulama of Islam would constantly remind themselves of the grave, not as a morbid obsession, but as a means of clarity. Because when you truly internalize this reality, it forces you to reevaluate your priorities. The question is no longer, what do people think of me? But rather, what will be with me when no one else is there? It shifts your focus from external validation to internal preparation. And perhaps the most sobering aspect of all of this is how sudden it can be. Death does not schedule an appointment. It does not wait for you to feel ready. There are people who woke up this morning with plans, with goals, with unfinished conversations, and by the evening, they were already in their graves. This is not meant to instill fear for the sake of fear, but to instill awareness. Because awareness leads to action. So before we move on, pause and ask yourself a very simple yet deeply uncomfortable question. If tonight was your last night, and tomorrow you were placed in your grave, who or what would truly be there with you? Because in the end, when the last voice fades and the final footstep disappears, the only thing that will remain is what you chose to carry with you. And that choice is being made right now. If we continue from that moment, the moment when the last person has left and you are now alone in your grave, we need to correct a very common misunderstanding. Many people subconsciously think of the grave as the end, as a kind of permanent silence where nothing really happens. But in our tradition, the grave is not an ending at all. It is a beginning. It is the first stage of a much longer journey, a transition from the alam of ad-dunya into the alam of the unseen. And this shift is not symbolic. It is real, immediate, and deeply consequential. The Prophet ﷺ described the grave as either a garden from the gardens of paradise or a pit from the pits of hell. That means that what you experience in the grave is not neutral. It is not an empty waiting room. It is an active state of existence that reflects the life you lived. From a psychological standpoint, this should completely transform how we think about time. Because we tend to delay change, telling ourselves, "I'll fix things later. I'll become better when I'm older, when I'm more settled, when I have more time." But the grave is the interruption of that illusion. It is the moment when later no longer exists. And what makes this even more profound is that the grave sets the tone for everything that comes after. If the beginning is ease, what follows will be easier. And if the beginning is difficulty, what follows will be more difficult. So, in reality, you are not just preparing for death. You are preparing for what comes immediately after death, in a phase that many people barely think about. Now reflect on how we prepare for other transitions in life. When you move to a new city, you plan ahead. You think about where you will live, how you will survive, what you will need. When you start a new job, you prepare yourself mentally and emotionally. You try to understand what is expected of you. Yet the greatest transition you will ever experience, the transition into the grave, is often the one we prepare for the least. Why is that? Part of it is denial. Part of it is distraction. But part of it is also a lack of deep reflection. Because if a person truly understood that the grave is the first station of the hereafter, it would fundamentally reshape their priorities. You would begin to see your daily actions not as isolated moments, but as investments into that next phase. Every prayer, every act of sincerity, every moment of restraint when you could have sinned but chose not to, these are not small things. They are provisions being sent forward. And on the other hand, every act of dhulm, every moment of heedlessness, every time we knowingly turn away from what we know is right, these too are being sent forward. Nothing is lost. Nothing is forgotten. The grave is where the nata'ij, the consequences, begin to manifest. There is also a deeper philosophical dimension here, about accountability. In this world, justice is often incomplete. People get away with dhulm. Others suffer without apparent reason. But the grave is the beginning of perfect justice. It is where the illusion of a dunya is stripped away and reality becomes clear. You see things as they truly are, not as they appeared to be. And perhaps one of the most striking aspects of this stage is that it is intensely personal. You are not compared to anyone else. You are not judged based on someone else's standards. It is just you and your record. You and what you chose to prioritize. You and the reality you built for yourself. So when we speak about the grave, we are not speaking about something distant or abstract. We are speaking about the very next phase of your existence. It is closer to you than you realize. And the life you are living right now is directly shaping what that phase will look like. So the question is no longer whether the grave will come, because it will. The real question is, when that first station of the hereafter begins, will it open for you as a place of peace or a place of regret? Because the journey has already started, whether you are conscious of it or not, and what awaits you there is being decided by the choices you make today. Once we understand that the grave is not an end but a beginning, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly accompanies you into that new phase of existence? If people cannot go with you, if wealth and status are left behind, then what remains? Our tradition gives a very clear and, at the same time, deeply profound answer. Your deeds. But when we say, your deeds, we should not reduce this to a simplistic checklist of actions. There is a deeper reality being described here. Your deeds are not just records written in a book somewhere. They are, in a very real sense, extensions of who you are. They are the manifestations of your choices, your priorities, your intentions. And in the grave, those manifestations take on a form that directly impacts your experience. There is a narration that describes how a person's righteous deeds will come to them in the form of a companion, something that brings comfort, light, and reassurance. And conversely, a person's fasad, their dhulm, their neglect, can come in forms that bring distress and fear. This is not merely symbolic language. It is meant to reshape how you perceive your everyday actions. Because what you do is not temporary. It does not simply disappear once the moment has passed. It is carried forward, transformed, and then returned to you in a way that you will fully experience. From a psychological perspective, this challenges one of our most dangerous assumptions, that small actions do not matter. We often think, it's just one missed prayer. It's just one lie. It's just one moment of heedlessness. But when you begin to see actions as seeds rather than isolated incidents, the entire framework changes. A seed may appear insignificant in the moment, but over time, it grows into something far greater than what it initially seemed. In the same way, every action you perform is planting something that will eventually take shape in your grave. And this applies not only to outward actions, but to inner states as well. Your sincerity, your humility, your khawf of Allah, your hope in His mercy. These are also deeds. They are internal realities that shape your external behavior, and they too will have consequences. A person who lived with a qalb that was connected to Allah will not be the same as a person who lived in constant heedlessness. Even if their outward lives appeared similar, their inner worlds were entirely different. And in the grave, that difference becomes undeniable. There is also an element of adalat here that is both comforting and sobering. It is comforting because it means that nothing good you do is ever wasted. Even the smallest act, a kind word, a hidden charity, a moment of patience, these are mahfuz, preserved, and they will return to you when you need them most. But it is also sobering because it means that nothing negative is truly forgotten either. The things we justify, the habits we ignore, the wrongs we fail to correct, they do not simply vanish. And this brings us to a very important realization. In the grave, you are not waiting for something external to save you. You are meeting what you have already sent ahead. The companion you will have in that darkness is not something that will suddenly appear without cause. It is something you have been building, day by day, choice by choice. This is why the righteous were so conscious of consistency. They understood that it is not about grand, occasional acts, but about sustained patterns of behavior. A small deed done regularly becomes something azim over time. And a neglected obligation, repeated again and again, becomes something heavy and difficult to escape. So when you think about your life, do not just think in terms of moments. Think in terms of patterns. What are you consistently doing? What are you repeatedly neglecting? Because those patterns are shaping the reality that will eventually surround you. And if you are honest with yourself, you will realize that your future companion is already being formed. It is being shaped in the quiet moments when no one is watching, in the decisions you make when you have the option to choose between what is easy and what is right. So ask yourself, not in a superficial way, but with real introspection. If your deeds were to take form tonight, if they were to become your companion in the grave, would they comfort you? Or would they terrify you? Because in the end, you will not be alone. You will be in the company of everything you chose to become. And this naturally brings us to something very specific. something that our tradition highlights in a way that is both unique and deeply comforting. Because after understanding that your deeds will accompany you, the question becomes, are there particular deeds that carry a special weight, a unique role, in that darkness of the grave? And the answer is yes. Among them is Surah Al-Mulk. The Prophet ﷺ described this surah as one that intercedes for its companion until they are forgiven. Think about that concept for a moment. Intercession. It is not a passive quality. It implies advocacy. It implies that something you engaged with in this world will stand on your behalf when you are no longer able to speak for yourself. In the grave, where you have no ability to negotiate, no ability to argue, no ability to present your case, this surah becomes a form of difa, a shield that actively protects you. But we have to be careful not to reduce this to a kind of ritualistic shortcut, as though simply reciting words without understanding or consistency will automatically produce results. The power of Surah Al-Mulk is not just in its recitation, but in the relationship you build with it. This surah, if you reflect on its themes, is entirely centered on the reality of life and death, on the ikhtibar of existence, on the absolute power and dominion of Allah. It repeatedly redirects your attention away from the ghurur of this world and towards the haqiqat of accountability. So when a person recites it regularly, especially at night, in those quiet moments before sleep, they are not just performing a ritual. They are engaging in a daily recalibration of their worldview. They are reminding themselves again and again that life is temporary, that death is certain, and that what truly matters is how they respond to the test they have been given. Over time, this shapes the al-qalb. It influences how you think, how you prioritize, how you act. And this is where the deeper psychological dimension comes in. Human beings are creatures of habit. What you expose your mind to consistently will shape your internal reality. If your nights are filled with distraction, with noise, with heedlessness, then that becomes your norm. But if your nights include even a few minutes of sincere engagement with something as profound as Surah Al-Mulk, it begins to anchor you. It creates a nuqta of stability in an otherwise chaotic life. Now imagine the one who maintained this relationship. Not perfectly, but consistently. Night after night, despite fatigue, despite distraction, they returned to these verses. They allowed these words to settle into their consciousness. And then, one day, they are placed in their grave. The darkness closes in. The khawf of the unknown begins to rise. And at that moment, something familiar appears. Not a stranger, but something they have known. Something they have carried with them all along. This is the meaning of companionship in the grave. It is not abstract. It is deeply personal. The surah you recited becomes a source of light. The words you repeated become a form of protection. The habit you struggled to maintain becomes the very thing that now shields you from harm. And what is remarkable is how accessible this is. We are not speaking about something that requires immense wealth, or extraordinary effort, or rare opportunity. We are speaking about a surah that takes only a few minutes to recite. A few minutes that most of us can easily spend on things that bring no lasting benefit. And yet, those same few minutes, if redirected with intention, can transform your experience in the grave. This is where sincerity becomes crucial. It is not about quantity alone. It is about huzur, being present. It is about recognizing that these words are not ordinary. They are kalam of Allah, carrying a weight and a reality that goes beyond what we immediately perceive. And the more you engage with them sincerely, the more they become a part of you. So the next time you think about your nightly routine, ask yourself, what am I sending forward into my grave? What am I choosing to carry with me into that darkness? Because one day, when you have no ability to protect yourself, no ability to call for help. The only defense you will have is what you built in this world. And for the one who held firmly to Surah Al-Mulk, that defense will not remain silent. At this point, everything we've discussed naturally leads to a very practical question. What does it actually take to build something that will remain with you in the grave? Because for many people, when they hear about the weight of deeds, the reality of the grave, and the responsibility of preparation, there is an immediate sense of overwhelm. They begin to think, I'm not there yet. I'm not consistent. I make too many mistakes. And sometimes that feeling itself becomes a barrier. But this is where one of the most important principles of our deen comes in. A principle that is both deeply merciful and profoundly realistic. Allah does not demand perfection from you. What He asks for is sincerity and consistency. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized that the most beloved deeds to Allah are those that are done regularly, even if they are small. Now pause and reflect on that, because it directly challenges how we tend to think. We are often drawn to extremes. We have moments of motivation where we want to do everything at once, recite large portions of the Quran, wake up every night, transform our entire lifestyle overnight. And while that passion is not wrong, it is often unsustainable. It fades, and when it fades, it leaves behind a sense of failure. But Islam does not build you through bursts of intensity. It builds you through stability. From a psychological perspective, this aligns perfectly with how human behavior actually works. Habits are not formed through occasional effort. They are formed through repetition. A small action, done consistently, begins to rewire your identity. It stops feeling like something external that you are forcing yourself to do, and it becomes part of who you are. This is exactly how something like Surah Al-Mulk becomes powerful in your life. Not because you recited it once with intensity, but because you returned to it again and again, even on the days when you were tired, even on the days when you didn't feel particularly motivated. Those are the moments that actually matter the most, because they reflect commitment, not just emotion. And there is something deeply transformative about this kind of consistency. It creates a quiet discipline within you. It teaches you that your relationship with Allah is not dependent on your mood. It becomes sabit, stable. And over time, these small, consistent acts accumulate in ways that you cannot fully perceive in this world, but that will become wadih, clear, in the next. Think about it in simple terms. If someone were to give a small amount of charity every single day, it may not seem significant in the moment, but over months and years, it becomes something substantial. Now apply that same logic to your spiritual life. A few minutes of recitation every night, a consistent effort to guard your prayers, a habit of making sincere dua. These are not small things when they are sustained. They are building something far greater than what you can measure right now. And perhaps just as importantly, consistency protects you from despair. Because when you understand that Allah values what you can maintain, you no longer feel the need to reach an unrealistic standard. You focus on what is within your capacity. You build gradually. And in that gradual process, there is barakah. There is blessing. This also reframes how you deal with your shortcomings. You will make mistakes. You will have days where you fall short. But consistency means you return. You don't let one failure define your entire trajectory. You don't abandon the path because you stumbled on it. Instead, you recognize that the path itself is built on istimrar, continuation. So when you think about preparing for the grave, don't think in terms of grand gestures that you may never sustain. Think in terms of what you can commit to every single day. What is that one amal that you will not abandon, no matter how your circumstances change? Because in the end, It is not the intensity of what you start that will save you. It is the consistency of what you continue. And after reflecting on all of this, the loneliness of the grave, the reality that it is the first stage of the hereafter, the fact that your deeds will accompany you, and the unique role of something like Surah Al-Mulk, we arrive at perhaps the most uncomfortable yet necessary conclusion. This is not information meant to simply be understood. It is meant to change you. Because knowledge, in our tradition, is not an end in itself. It is a responsibility. The moment you become aware of a truth, you are no longer the same as the one who was unaware. And that means you can no longer live with the same level of heedlessness, the same casual attitude toward your time, your choices, your priorities. The problem, however, is not that we don't know. Most people, at some level, already know these realities. They know that death is certain. They know that the grave is coming. They know that their actions matter. But there is a gap, a very dangerous gap, between knowing and acting. And that gap is often filled with one word: later. I'll start tomorrow. I'll become more serious when things settle down. I'll fix myself when I'm older. But the reality is, later is one of the greatest illusions we live under. Because it assumes something that none of us have been guaranteed: the assumption that you will have more time. From a psychological perspective, this is a form of cognitive distancing. We push uncomfortable truths into the future so that they don't disrupt our present comfort. But in doing so, we create a false sense of security. We begin to live as though time is in our control, when in reality, it is one of the few things that is completely outside of our control. Death does not operate according to your schedule. It does not wait for you to feel ready. It does not align itself with your plans, your ambitions, your unfinished goals. There are people who had intentions to change, sincere intentions, but they never acted on them. And that intention, without action, did not benefit them. And this is where the urgency of the message becomes clear. You are not being asked to transform into a perfect person overnight. You are being asked to take a step, a real, tangible step, something that begins now, not tomorrow. Because the value of a decision is not in how it sounds, but in when it is implemented. Ask yourself, very honestly, what is the one thing I have been delaying that I know I need to start? Is it consistency in prayer? Is it reconnecting with the Quran? Is it letting go of a habit that I know is harming me? Is it committing to something as simple yet powerful as reciting Surah Al-Mulk every night? Whatever it is, the waqt to begin is not some distant future. It is this moment. And there is something deeply empowering about that realization. Because while you do not control when your life will end, you do control what you do with the time you have right now. You control the direction you choose. You control whether you continue on a path of delay or whether you interrupt that pattern and begin something meaningful. And understand this clearly. Small beginnings are not insignificant. In fact, they are the only way real change happens. A single consistent act, started today, can alter the entire trajectory of your life. And more importantly, it can alter what awaits you in your grave. So do not underestimate the weight of this moment. Do not walk away from this reflection unchanged. Because every day you delay is a day that cannot be recovered. A day that could have been used to build something that would stand beside you when everything else disappears. One day, you will wish for one more opportunity to act. But that wish will come at a time when action is no longer possible. So act now while you still can.